Show us your honesty. Prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us.
WION, now available on Spotify and Google Podcast. It all began here. A journey that shaped Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. A movement to stand for what is right. Over a century later, India's only international channel is here in South Africa.
Today it has engulfed the entire country. Business owners are complaining of financial...
Going behind the headlines to bring you reports from the heart of the nation. WION, coming soon to South Africa on ESTV. Stay connected with the world through WION. Like the page on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter for new alerts. Instagram for videos and images. And the website for the latest news, views and analysis. WIONews.com. World is one.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington DC. I'm Nick Harper and these are the top stories of the hour. The US government wins an appeal against a London court ruling that had blocked the extradition of Wikileaks founder Julian Assange from Britain. The UN decries the disturbing information uncovered in a report by a London panel on alleged rights abuses against China's Uyghur minority, adding it would publish its own probe into the situation. A deadline set by France for Britain to grant licences to its fishing boats is set to expire today, with Paris threatening legal action unless a last-minute compromise can be found. More than 50 people, most of them migrants from Central America, were killed in a trailer crash in the southern Mexican state of Chiapas. The last rites of India's first Chief of Defence, Staff General Bipin Rawat, and his wife Madhulika Rawat were performed in New Delhi. We begin with the latest twist in the long-running case of espionage. The Wikileaks founder, Julian Assange, is one step closer to being extradited to the United States. The US government has won the appeal against a London court ruling. This was the ruling that blocked Assange's extradition from the UK. The January ruling said that Assange could not be extradited, keeping his mental health concerns in mind. But the United States appealed against this, saying it would reduce any risks of suicide. The US also assured judges that Assange would not face the strictest measures, especially before any trial or after his conviction. Assange's fiancée has called the ruling dangerous and misguided. She said that they will appeal against the decision. Julian Assange is wanted in the United States for releasing classified documents. Assange has spent most of the past decade either in custody or holed up in an embassy, trying to avoid extradition. So let's go through some of the key details of his case. Julian Assange founded Wikileaks back in 2006. He created an internet-based dead letter drop website, which means leakers could drop any classified or sensitive information into the website. In April 2010, a leaked video from a US helicopter emerged on Wikileaks. The video showed an airstrike by the US military, one that killed civilians in Baghdad, including 2 news staff. Again, after nearly 3 months, 91,000 documents carrying US military reports on the Afghanistan war were released. And the same year, in October, 400,000 classified military files on the Iraq War became public. This was followed by the release of thousands of diplomatic cables. They included candid views on foreign leaders and blunt assessments of security threats. The US State Department charged Assange with violating the US Espionage Act for publishing military and diplomatic files in 2010. He faces up to 18 charges, 17 of which fall under the Act. If convicted, he faces jail terms of up to 175 years. Currently, the US has assured the UK court that Assange would receive appropriate clinical and psychological treatment. Washington has even agreed to transfer him to Australia if he is convicted.
Hands off Assange! Hands off Assange!
It's been almost a year since I stood outside court with our victory of the blocking of the extradition. For the past year, and the past year, 2 years and a half, Julian has remained in Belmarsh prison, and in fact, he has been detained since the 7th of December 2010 in one form or another, 11 years. For how long can this go on?
Next, the Summit for Democracy has resumed. Today is the second day of world leaders logging in to the virtual summit. Today, the Prime Minister of India has addressed the Assembly. He spoke about the democratic spirit being an integral part to India's ethos.
This very democratic spirit and ethos had made ancient India one of the most prosperous. Centuries of colonial rule could not suppress the democratic spirit of the Indian people. It again found full expression with India's independence and led to an unparalleled story in democratic nation building over the last 75 years. It is a story of unprecedented socio-economic inclusion in all spheres. It is a story constant improvements in health, education, and human well-being at an unimaginable scale. The India story has one clear message to the world, that democracy can deliver, that democracy has delivered, and that democracy will continue to deliver.
Prime Minister Modi was one of 12 leaders invited to the main leaders' plenary session on day one of the summit. The summit commenced with US President Joe Biden calling on countries to reaffirm their democratic values. He's announced the allocation of over $200 million towards the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal.
Today, I'm proud to launch the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal, which will focus efforts across our diplomacy and foreign assistance programs to bolster democratic resilience and human rights and globally. Working with our Congress, we're planning to commit as much as $224 million in the next year to shore up transparent and accountable governance.
French President Emmanuel Macron stressed on the need to have open debates and gave the example of problems faced by Afghanistan.
When I see the resistance of our democracies to this pandemic, and when I see the autocratic regimes, I see the difference. We have open science, we have open debates on sciences, and all these choices allow us to produce better. And we continue to live through challenging times, to experience geopolitical tensions that challenge our values. The Afghanistan challenge and the humanitarian disaster that came with it show the challenges that we face and also the solidarity that most of us are demonstrating by giving asylum to Afghans.
Well, for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tarani is joining us live from New York City. Susan, we've had one day already. There's another day still to go. What's your assessment so far? And do you feel that there's a sense that the president is making lasting achievements at this summit?
So the goal is to bring countries together to stand up to autocratic regimes and to authoritarian regimes with a unified voice. And those slogans are very appealing, and it seems from the speeches that we've heard so far, just like the speeches that we hear usually at these summits, that the summit has been successful so far. I think one challenge moving forward will be this year of action that President Biden is speaking of, which means that these countries will then go home and during the next 12 months adhere to a set of pledges and contributions, as the president himself noted the United States wants to do with those hundreds of millions of dollars in promoting quote-unquote democracy. By the way, that's if Congress agrees to President Biden's pledge that he mentioned. And then if they do meet those pledges, then they get to come back again next year for another quote-unquote summit of democracy. So they have this summit, they make these goals and aspirations, and then they go home, and you know, we see how this plays out in the real world. In terms of sending a message, it has been successful. It has raised some concern with Russia and China. I guess those two countries were the main targets. But I think ultimately one of the criticisms that the Biden administration here at home has been facing was the fact that he sort of hammered down on the challenges that the United States has been facing here at home, and talking about the imperfect nature of American democracy. And his critics say that while America hasn't had a perfect past, it's still the perfect and the best version of liberal democracy moving forward, and this wasn't the path and the policy that, for example, Ronald Reagan or his predecessors took forth when they brought down the Soviet Union. They also had these messages ideologically along with containment. So they hope that Biden sort of moves forward during the second day with more of a position of strength on the part of the United States and not maybe air so much America's issues domestically regarding partisan politics for his benefit and focus on the big picture more.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Tarani joining us live from New York City. Next today, negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal have resumed in Vienna. Diplomats have been holding talks, but signs for progress are diminishing with each passing day. In the latest, the Biden administration has issued a stern warning to Tehran if diplomacy fails.
President Biden is committed to ensuring Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon and believes diplomacy in coordination with allies and regional partners is the best path to achieve that goal. We believe a diplomatic resolution offers the best path to avoiding a nuclear crisis. However, given the ongoing advances in Iran's nuclear program, the president has asked his team to be prepared in the event that diplomacy fails, and we must turn to other options, and that requires preparations.
Biden's stance is clear. Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. And the United States Press Secretary has hinted about an upcoming plan of action if diplomacy fails. On the sidelines of the Vienna talks, military leaders in the United States and Israel held a meeting at the Pentagon on Thursday with the aim to ramp up pressure on Iran. The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and his Israeli counterpart Benny Gantz have agreed on expanding cooperation in the face of the Iranian threat.
I'm deeply concerned about the Iranian government's nuclear actions in recent months, both its continued provocations and its lack of constructive diplomatic engagement. The President has made clear that if diplomacy fails, we are prepared to turn to other options. The Department of Defense will continue to work closely with all of our partners throughout the region, including Israel first and foremost, to ensure that we're working together to address Iranian threats. We will defend ourselves, we will defend our friends, and we will defend our interests.
The nuclear program is a means to Iran's hegemonic goals, imposing its radical ideology and threatening Israel's existence. I am totally confident in the commitment of the administration of the United States as a global power to prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapons.
Well, all of this comes a day after reports indicated possible military exercises between the two nations. The drill would prepare for a worst-case scenario if things don't go as per America's plans. The official, however, declined to offer details on the potential military exercises. The chief negotiator of Europe has said that there was a renewed sense of purpose from the representatives at the table. However, the task ahead is not an easy one to carry out.
It's difficult. It's a very difficult endeavor. There are still different positions that we have to marry. This is the gist of the negotiation, and we will see how we can proceed and how we can advance.
For their part, Iranian officials have insisted they are serious about the talks. Tehran's chief negotiator, Ali Bagheri, said the fact that the two sides are continuing to talk indicates that they want to narrow the gaps. France is moving forward to take over the European Union's rotating presidency in 2022. As French President Emmanuel Macron prepares for the presidency of the EU, he's vowed to work towards a strong and sovereign regional bloc. Macron is seen as the most dominant leader in the EU after Angela Merkel, and analysts believe that Macron may aim to use the 6-month EU mandate to fill the gap in European leadership after Merkel. The 6-month tenure, due to start on January the 1st, overlaps with the country's presidential election. Ahead of the dual challenges, Macron appears to be bringing about a change in his approach to dealing with geopolitics, especially when it comes to representing Europe on the global landscape. Macron's actions are already beginning to tread independently of the United States. His decision to not join the diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, the French president believes such a move is insignificant. Macron has also planned to hold talks with Russian and European or Ukrainian leaders to discuss the Ukraine situation. Macron is also due to meet Germany's new Social Democrat Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Just a month before the presidential vote, France would host an extraordinary EU summit on March the 10th and March the 11th in Paris. Macron has perhaps begun to portray himself as the representative of EU leadership. Domestically also, 2022 will be a crucial year for Macron as he fights in the elections. He has faced criticism, though, for not postponing France's EU presidency. It could put him in a tricky position if he campaigns for re-election. But French elections could also play into Macron's favour. Analysts believe that to assure a stable Europe, he could very well play up the need for stability and consistency in French leadership. It could be positive, as it reinforces his credibility. And he can play on the idea that a change of president in the middle of France's presidency of the European Union is not necessarily good, neither for France's position in Europe nor for the European Union. Next, the European Commission has announced draft rules for employee benefits, which will help cab drivers and delivery employees. While labour unions are celebrating the move, some are not so happy.
The European Commission has drafted new rules on the so-called gig economy. It aims to give workers for online platforms the right to a minimum wage, paid holidays and pension rights. The announcement was made Thursday and affects those working at companies like Uber and Deliveroo. It's a world first, but still needs to be agreed by EU countries and lawmakers before it can become law. European Commissioner for Trade, Valdis Dombrovskis.
Platform workers deserve the same level of protection than everyone in the EU under our social model. Today's package of proposals is there to address these issues.
It's the EU's latest attempt to regulate tech companies and push for a level playing field between online and traditional firms. If the new rules are made law, online platform companies that set pay and standards of conduct for their workers will have to classify them as employees. Online food ordering and delivery firms have long fought court cases around Europe and the US to have their couriers classed as self-employed rather than employees. Reactions to the EU draft from affected companies was mixed. JustEatTakeaway.com CEO Jitse Groen said he welcomed the proposed new rules, but a lobby group that includes Uber and Deliveroo said that the proposals would lead to job losses.
Meanwhile, in America, Starbucks employees have voted to join a unionised company-owned location in the government, an affiliate of the Service Employees International Union. Take a look.
Hugs and cheers Thursday after Starbucks workers voted in favor of a union at one company-owned Starbucks store in Buffalo, New York, in a first for the coffee giant in the U.S. The store in upstate New York voted to join Workers United, an affiliate of the Service Employees International Union. Workers at a second location in Buffalo voted to reject the drive to organize. The vote at a third store ended without a definitive result because a number of ballots were still under review. The closely watched results come as corporate America eyes new union organizing campaigns amid a U.S. labor shortage that has already led to higher wages at most large retailer and restaurant chains. Though financial analyst Art Hogan told Reuters on Thursday the path toward unionization at Starbucks won't be easy.
Is this going to tip over the apple cart for them, or is this the beginning of something where employees say, how well am I treated at Starbucks? And when you step back and look at the way Starbucks actually treats their employees, both being one of the first companies to raise the minimum wage for employees, paying for education, and the fact that they've kept their employees safe by shutting down stores during the pandemic, I think that it's one of those cases that's you'd be hard-pressed to say a union is going to have a very easy road into all of these stores.
Some local baristas had decried what they said were aggressive company tactics, including flooding Buffalo locations with executives, holding meetings with employees, and even bringing in ex-CEO Howard Schultz to talk to workers and extol the virtues of existing wage hikes and benefits. Starbucks denies that any of its actions amounted to union busting. The vote was 19-8 in favor of joining the union.
Finally, it's time to move over reindeer because Santa has a new mode of transport. Santa Claus in Guatemala is flying in on a helicopter to visit children. We'll leave you with these visuals. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
Santa Claus llegó bien. Un aplauso para ella, por favor. Hoy entregamos este obsequio. Bien, aplausos para ella, por favor. Ay,